In a vast desert of digital noise, find your peaceful oasis in the glowing neon of our cinematic storytelling. We offer a place for deep reflection, raw emotion, and the beauty of art. Click subscribe now and find your sanctuary in our world of vivid stories.
My brother didn't know I was recording when he dropped something into my wine glass at my father's will reading. He didn't know. I had watched him do it from the reflection in the window behind him. He didn't know that I had spent the last 3 weeks quietly, carefully, building the case that would end his marriage, his reputation, and his freedom, all in one evening. I didn't scream. I didn't knock the glass over. I just picked it up, smiled across the table at his wife, and said, "Jocelyn, you have to try this. Dad always said you had better taste than any of us." Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment and tell me, what is the one thing a family member did to you that you forgave too quickly, and you're still paying for it? I want to read your answers, because I spent 31 years paying for mine. You need to understand what kind of family I come from before any of this makes sense. My father was a self-made man, which is the polite way of saying he never let anyone forget how little help he had. He built a small commercial cleaning company from nothing, literally from a mop and a borrowed van, and by the time I was in high school, it had 15 employees and 3 county contracts. Not wealthy, not legacy money, but stable and paid for in his. My brother Alec is 4 years older than me. Growing up, Alec was the one my father took to job sites, the one who learned to drive in the company truck, the one my father introduced at Chamber of Commerce dinners as my boy who's going to take over the whole thing one day. I was the one who kept the books in high school when Dad's part-time office manager quit. I was the one who called the insurance company, filed the quarterly paperwork, learned the software because nobody else would. I was useful. Alec was the heir. I told myself it was fine. I told myself I was the steady one, the behind-the-scenes one, and that quiet work had its own kind of dignity. I believed that for a long time. Then my father got sick. It started with fatigue, then a diagnosis, then a year that moved faster than I knew years could move. I flew home from Portland where I had been working as a paralegal, and I just stayed. I managed his care schedule. I handled the pharmacy, the insurance appeals, the home health aides, the twice-weekly infusions. I slept in my childhood bedroom for 11 months and I didn't complain once because he was my father, and you don't complain about that. Alec visited twice. He sent flowers after the second visit. My father died on a Wednesday in March. It was raining the way it only rains in the South. That warm, heavy kind of rain that smells like earth and cedar. I was holding his hand. Alec was 3 states away at a sales conference and sent a voice memo saying he was devastated and on the first flight home. He arrived in time for the funeral and stood at the reception, afterward looking appropriately bereaved and accepting condolences with the practiced ease of someone who had spent years being the face of a family he barely showed up for. The will reading was scheduled for the following Friday at the attorney's office downtown. Just family, which meant me, Alec, and his wife Jocelyn. A thin, precise woman who had never liked me and had never bothered to pretend otherwise. She taught spin classes and used the word boundaries as a weapon. I didn't sleep the week before the reading. Not because I expected much. Dad and I had talked, and I knew the business was going to Alec. That had always been the plan. What I expected was the house, which had been in my mother's family, and a small cash inheritance my father had mentioned when he was still well enough to mention things directly. What I did not expect was what happened 3 days before the reading. I had gone back to the house to pack up the last of my things. Alec and Jocelyn had been staying there since the funeral, to handle logistics, Alec said, which I was starting to understand meant something different than I had assumed. I came in through the back door because I still had my key, and the front porch light had burned out, and nobody had replaced it. The kitchen light was on. I heard Jocelyn's voice first, low and tight, the way she talked when she was managing Alec rather than talking to him. The revised beneficiary form went through. I confirmed it this morning. I stopped moving. What about her? Alec's voice. The life insurance. She's still the named beneficiary on his personal policy. The one from before he updated everything else. Silence. How much? 400,000. But here's the thing. I heard a drawer open. It's an accidental death policy, not a standard term life. It paid out when he died. She gets it automatically unless we can demonstrate she was the cause of the accident. He didn't have an accident. He had cancer. I know that. But the policy was taken out before the diagnosis. The language is, it's complicated. My friend at Kellerman said if we had documentation suggesting she was negligent in his care during a fall or a medical episode, we could contest the distribution. I was standing in the dark hallway with my hand against the wall. She didn't cause anything, Alec said. But he didn't say it the way you say something you believe. He said it the way you say something you're hoping someone will help you get past. I know, Jocelyn said. Which is why we need to be creative. I went back out the way I came in. I sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes. I thought about going to the police right then. But I had nothing concrete. Just a conversation I'd overheard through a wall about something that might have been hypothetical, or might have been the opening move of something much worse. Jocelyn was careful. Alec was not bold enough to do anything without her engineering it first. I needed to know what creative meant before I could stop it. I went to an electronics store the next morning and bought a clip-on recording device the size of a guitar pick. I had learned about them from a deposition transcript at work. Attorneys use them when they're building records in contested estate cases, which I now understood more personally than I ever expected. I wore it to every interaction with Alec and Jocelyn for the next 72 hours. The will reading was at 4 in the afternoon. Jocelyn had suggested beforehand that we have dinner together that evening, to start processing everything as a family. She made a reservation at a restaurant my father had liked. I said yes. She had also offered to bring wine to the attorney's office. Something Dad would have liked, she said. We can toast him before we go in. The attorney had a small conference table, and Jocelyn arrived with a bottle of a Burgundy my father had served at Christmas dinners. It was a kind gesture, the kind Jocelyn made when she needed something to look like she was a kind person. I watched her pour from my seat at the end of the table. She poured Alec's glass first, then the attorney's, then mine. The attorney stepped out briefly to take a call. Alec's phone buzzed and he turned his chair toward the window to check it. And in that window's reflection, I watched Jocelyn take a small folded paper from the inside pocket of her blazer and tip it over my glass. My chest went completely still. I watched her tuck the paper back. I watched her smooth her blazer. I watched her settle into her chair and fold her hands on the table with the composure of someone who had been rehearsing this moment. The attorney came back. The reading began. I heard approximately 40% of it, because the rest of my attention was on the glass in front of me, and on Jocelyn's hands, and on the particular quality of stillness that settles over a room when something terrible is hiding inside a normal afternoon. The house went to Alec. The business went to Alec. There was a small bequest for a neighbor who had helped with Dad's garden, and a request to donate to a local scholarship fund. My name appeared once, for a set of my mother's jewelry, that Jocelyn's eyes had gone to immediately when the attorney said it. The $400,000 insurance policy was not mentioned. Of course it wasn't. It wasn't part of the estate. It was a separate instrument. It would pay out directly to me, and nobody in that room was going to bring attention to it. The attorney finished. He offered handshakes and condolences, and left us to gather ourselves. Alec poured himself more wine. He looked at me with the specific expression of someone who feels guilty, but has decided to blame you for their guilt. She would have wanted you to have the jewelry, he said, which was such an extraordinary thing to say that I didn't respond to it. Jocelyn raised her glass. To your father. She looked at me. She glanced at my untouched glass. Her eyes moved to my face and then away, a fraction too quickly. I can't, I said. I've had a headache all day. I reached for the glass, turned it slightly in my hand, and looked across the table at Jocelyn. You've barely touched yours, though. Was it not what you expected? It's lovely, she said. I'm just pacing myself. Dad always said you had the best palate in the family, I said. I slid my glass across the table toward her. Try the rest of mine. It seems wrong to waste it. She didn't move. I'm fine with mine, she said. You said you're pacing yourself. You've barely had any. I kept my voice warm. Come on. He would have liked us to finish the bottle. Alec was watching us with the expression of a man who cannot remember the name of the feeling he's having. Jocelyn, he said. Something in his voice had changed. I don't want it, she said, and there was a tightness there now. I have a sensitivity to tannins. Since when? I asked. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw the moment she understood that I had not touched that glass on purpose, that I had been waiting, that the question was not about wine at all. Elena, Alec said, and I turned to him. My name is not Elena, I said. Sorry. He ran a hand over his face. Look, it's been a hard day. I watched her do it, I said, quietly. The way you say something that ends one version of your life and starts another in the window. The room dropped several degrees. Do what? Jocelyn said, and her voice was impressive. Steady, indignant, already building the structure of the lie. I have the video, I said. I set my phone on the table. I pressed play. It was the angle from across the room, shot on a delay timer I'd set before she arrived, positioned behind a stack of the attorney's folders. The resolution wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough. Her hand, the paper, the glass. Jocelyn made a sound I'd never heard a human being make, a short, involuntary thing, like the air going out of something pressurized. Alec looked at his wife. He looked at the screen. He looked at the glass she had not touched. He was doing arithmetic, and I watched the answers land on him one by one. What is in that glass? He said. Not a question. Ask her, I said. Jocelyn. His voice had changed completely now. All the careful management was gone. He sounded like a person who has just understood that the house they're standing in is on fire. What did you put in her glass? It was nothing. It was a supplement. For anxiety, I thought it would help her get through the reading. You carry supplements in folded paper in the inside pocket of your blazer, I said. She stood up. Her chair scraped back hard against the floor. You don't know what you're talking about. Then drink it, I said. I pushed the glass toward her. If it's a supplement, drink it. I'll feel much better. She didn't move. Nobody moved. And in that stillness, Alec looked at his wife the way you look at something when you finally let yourself see it, and what he saw unmade him in real time. What did you do? He said. And then he was across the table, grabbing her arm, and she was wrenching away from him, and the glass went over. The wine spreading dark, across the white surface of the table like something opening. And I stepped back and picked up my phone and called 911. I told them I needed police and possibly emergency medical response. I told them where we were, and I gave them the attorney's name so they could call ahead. I did not tell them what was in the glass. I didn't know yet. Toxicology would eventually identify it as a high-dose benzodiazepine compound. The kind of thing that wouldn't kill a person with certainty, but would create a convincing medical episode. The kind of collapse that could look, to a responding paramedic, like a pre-existing heart condition or a sudden neurological event. The kind of thing that, combined with a contested insurance claim and a family history of stress and grief, might look like a tragedy. Jocelyn had been careful. She had thought about it. But careful people leave traces. Careful people still have browser histories, and pharmacy records and text threads. With the one friend they trusted enough to ask for something they didn't want to ask for in their own name. The police arrived in 9 minutes. Alec let them in. He was gray by then, sitting in the corner of the room with his elbows on his knees, and when the first officer came through the door, Alec looked up and said, "My wife put something in my sister's drink, I don't know what it was." And then he said nothing else for a very long time. I handed over the recording device. I handed over my phone. I gave a statement that took 45 minutes and covered everything from the conversation I'd heard through the kitchen wall to the will, reading to the glass on the table. What I didn't do was cry. Not then. I had been crying for 11 months. The quiet, functional kind of crying that happens when you're too busy to stop and feel things completely. I had cried when Dad had a bad week. I had cried in the hospital parking lot after the worst infusions. I had cried the morning he died and then gotten up and called the funeral home because nobody else was going to. I had earned a long time of not crying, and I intended to use it. Jocelyn was charged that night. The specific charges evolved over the following weeks as the toxicology report came back, and her phone was forensically examined, and her communications with a gym acquaintance who has a cousin with access to a hospital supply chain became something that prosecutors described, in a filing I was allowed to read, as a premeditated attempt to incapacitate the victim in a manner designed to facilitate financial fraud and potentially cause irreversible bodily harm. Her attorney would later describe it as a misunderstanding. The jury did not agree. Alec cooperated fully. He hadn't known about the glass. That much I eventually believed, not because he told me, but because I watched his face when he understood what had almost happened, and I am not capable of faking the color that left his skin in that moment. He had known about the beneficiary form manipulation. He had known about the scheme to challenge the insurance payout. He had been willing to participate in making my grief into a legal problem, as long as it didn't require him to be in the same room when it happened. That is its own kind of evil, the kind that keeps its hands clean and calls itself a bystander. He lost the business. Not because of the legal proceedings, though those complicated things, but because without me, without the institutional knowledge I had carried in my head for 15 years, without the relationships I had built with suppliers and county contacts, and the 2 senior employees who had been with Dad since the van, the company simply stopped working. It went under in 8 months. I heard this from one of the employees, who sent me a message to say he was sorry about everything and had found something new. I did not respond to the message. I sat with it for a long time and then archived it and made coffee and stood at the window of my apartment looking at a street I was still learning the rhythms of. The insurance policy paid out. $400,000, processed without a challenge, once the fraud attempt collapsed. I put a third of it into a fund for the employee who'd reached out, and 3 others I knew Dad had genuinely cared about. I used another portion to pay off a debt I'd been carrying since grad school. The rest I put somewhere safe and quiet, while I figured out what comes after a year like the one I'd just had, the house sold. I don't know what Alec did with the money, and I didn't ask. I kept one thing from my father's office, a photograph of him standing in front of the original company van, early 90s, squinting into the sun. He looks young and sunburned and slightly alarmed, like someone who has just agreed to more than he fully understood. I know that feeling. I moved cities. Not far. Just far enough that I don't run into anyone who knew my family before I had the words to explain what my family was. I still have the recording from the kitchen wall, the night I heard Jocelyn and Alec plan the shape of what they intended to do to me. I don't listen to it, but I keep it. Because there is something important in having proof that the thing you survived was real, that you didn't imagine the worst of it, that the version of events that lives in your head matches the one that exists in the world. People say you can't choose your family. I know that's true. But I also know that there is a moment, different for everyone, when you stop organizing your life around the ones who were supposed to love you, and start organizing it around the life you actually want to have. That moment doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with a clean ending or a door slamming shut. It comes quietly, sometimes in an attorney's conference room, sometimes in a parking lot at midnight, sometimes in the reflection of a window on the worst Friday afternoon of your life. It comes when you finally understand that the glass they keep handing you isn't a gift. So tell me, have you ever had a moment where you finally saw someone clearly for the first time, and you couldn't go back to not seeing it? Drop it in the comments. I want to know I'm not the only one who had to lose everything to understand what they were actually holding on to.